Well, good afternoon. Glad to see all of you. We've used up all the maps. I realize that sometimes maybe a couple took two. If you don't all need them, maybe put some up here and when we're done, and other people. I'm sure there'll be extras left around. One side of the map is Israel, and the other side is Haifa. So I'm sure that you don't need maybe two for the same stateroom. So if you've got extras, just leave them at the door, and then the folks that didn't get any can pick them up. So I know that the reason why many of you booked this cruise specifically is because of the Holy Land and Egypt. Not that the other ports are not interesting, but the real pull of this is the Holy Land and Egypt. So this afternoon I want to talk about the Holy Land, about Israel, and then the next lecture will be about Egypt. This morning we talked about, you were going to four of the most important holy cities in the world. We talked this morning about what makes a holy city, what makes a place holy, how does it get this kind of designation, what the meaning of holy is, and the basic Hebrew from which it comes is a word that means to be set apart. So typically something's holy is something that's set apart for some kind of holy function. And we mentioned this morning that really as people, in God's eyes, we're all set apart to serve Him regardless of what religion we call ourselves. We also talked about the difference between fact and tradition, and what tradition and fact. Tradition's the most common word that you'll hear once we hit the Holy Land. This is traditionally where Jesus did this. This is traditionally where this happened. Tradition, tradition, tradition. It's like Fiddler on the Roof, tradition, tradition. So in the Catholic Church, because of the role of the Pope as the mediator between God and man, what the Pope says is fact. What the Church says is fact. So a lot of things are fact because the Church said it. And this morning I mentioned this phrase that I learned in seminary, which was, history as a living fact consists not so much in what actually happened as in what people believe to have happened. So when we go to the Holy Land, we're going to see places where people believe that something happened. Whether in reality that event happened in that specific spot or not, there was no television news camera there to record the exact spot. That doesn't in any way denigrate the event that happened there. It just means that traditionally we think something may have happened. And the older the tradition, then the more credulence it has in terms of whether this is actually the spot. So we're going to visit some of the holiest cities and sites in the world. Not everybody who visited these places has come with the same intent as we do. Down through history, you had the Crusades, violent clashes between Christian knights and on pilgrimage from Europe to retake the Holy Land from Muslim control. Just outside of Haifa, or as they say here, Haifa, you can visit the ancient medieval city of Accra, or what they say here, Akko. And that is a medieval city that goes all the way back to the time of the Crusades, when Richard the Lionhearted actually was here, and you can go in the room where he had dinner and stuff, and it's a fascinating thing. Our pilgrimage is different. We come to experience the history, some of us to understand the roots of our various faiths, and some of us looking to find a new measure of this elusive thing called faith. But make no mistake about it, religion is big business in the Holy Land. And that's the dollar sign and the sign for the new Israeli shekel. And sometimes it's very easy to lose sight when we visit these holy cities. It's easy to confuse what is holy with what is just plain commerce. And there are tons of tourists, there are lines, there are soldiers, there are hawkers of everything holy and unholy, and it's easy to lose sight of why you wanted to come here and visit these holy places in the first place. But if you persevere and if you look beyond the commercialism and the hype, you just may find what it is you're looking for. And I like this poem by a Dutchman, Hank Bauma, about Israel. Everything here makes you think. Sometimes makes you hope, sometimes makes you sing. sometimes makes you despair, sometimes makes you stop talking and be very quiet. What do I look for here? God knows. In some way here, I need to come to terms with myself and get it all together. So I think if you persevere throughout this adventure, you will find what it is that you're looking for. The currency here is the Israeli new shekel. $1 US is about 3.65 shekels. 1 shekel is about 27 US cents. If you are on tour, you can probably get by with small US bills or euros. If you are on your own, you will definitely need local currency. Generally, although not always, an ATM with your bank card is the easiest and cheapest way to secure cash. Most banks connected with other banks, but remember the currency you're going to get is the local currency, so you don't want to get stuck with a bunch of shekels that maybe you can't use. Most of these ATMs will give you a choice of languages. If it's just in Hebrew, well, good luck. If you're going to do your own thing, even if on Haifa you're just going to go off for dinner or something, you will need to get some shekels. And I'll try and remember to show you where a place to get shekels is, not too far from the ship. So you hear a lot in the news about Israel. And from just what you hear in the news and in international politics about Israel, you'd think it was this huge, huge place. Actually, it's just a little larger than the U.S. state of New Jersey. It's 153rd largest country in the world, has a population of 7.5 million, a mean age of 29. So it's a relatively young population, relatively young country. Of these 7.5 million people, 76% are Jewish. 23% of the Jewish people were actually born in America or in Europe. 24% are Arabs. Religiously, 76% are Jewish, practicing to different degrees like everybody else. 17% are Muslim and 2% are Christian. Hebrew is the official language. Arabic is among Arabs. And the most common foreign language is English. So you'll pretty well be able to get by, in most cases, with English. Israel declared independence in 1948 following the UN decision to partition Palestine, and Israel's very existence has been contested and in conflict ever since. Because of that, Israel spends 7.4% of its GDP on military. That's the 6th largest in the world in terms of military expenditures as a percentage of GDP. 21 to 48 month military service is compulsory for both men and women if they are Jews. If they are not Jews, then the military service is volunteer. You can volunteer or not volunteer, it's up to you. It's a parliamentary democracy with the capital in Jerusalem, and voting age is 18. Now, as a country, Israel has pretty limited natural resources, but it nevertheless has a highly developed economy, including technology, wood, paper, potash, phosphates, agriculture, cement, chemicals, plastics, diamond cutting, textiles, tourism. Unemployment is about 6.4%, and the major international issues are, of course, as we know, conflicting conflicts and terrorist issues. So we're going to be going into the beautiful city of Haifa or Haifa. Haifa dates back to at least the 1st century BC. During the Crusades, Haifa, or specifically that area I mentioned, Accra, Akko, was a fortress of some importance, but afterward it declined and nearly disappeared. The modern city began in the 19th century, has grown steadily since. Now, if looking at the numbers on this cruise, I know that most of you are going to be going on one tour or another, either with Princess or independently. But for the few of you who want to, maybe you've been here before, whatever reason you want to spend the day in Haifa, you'll find it to be a modern city with nice beaches, not that it's going to be beach weather necessarily. Restaurants, a city that's easy to get around. Looming over the city where this picture was taken is Mount Carmel. This is where the prophet Elijah challenged the reigning powers of the day in the name of Yahweh. For those of you wanting to spend some time in Haifa on your own, there's a map on the back here. If you go into town on the Princess Shuttle, I'll talk about this in a minute, there is one place in town where the shuttle, near where the shuttle drops you off, that you can get shekels. If you're going in on your own, you want water, you want coffee, something like that, you will need shekels. You want to use the public transportation. But most of you are going to venture out into the rest of Israel and the Holy Land sites. And one of the most important physical features of the Holy Land is the Jordan River. 251 kilometers or 156 miles long. The river is actually shared by Syria, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. Now, on a lot of the tours, especially in the northern part up around Galilee, you're going to catch glimpses of the river as you drive along. Those of you that live near rivers know that rivers do what rivers want to do, and there isn't much you can do about that. And throughout history, the Jordan in particular has shifted its course like a giant snake. So the idea that we know the exact spot where anything took place, like the spot where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, what Princess calls the spot, quote, the spot where John the Baptist immersed Jesus in the waters of the Jordan, the idea that we may know where that spot is highly, highly unlikely. We have traditions, we have suppositions, we have theories, traditions as to where Jesus might have been baptized in and along the Jordan River. In recent years, the flow of the river has slowed to a dirty trickle as fresh water running into the river has been replaced with sewage. I know the Jordan River is going to disappoint you. It is not what you expect. To quote the Water Board, quote, sadly, the lower Jordan has long suffered from severe mismanagement with the diversion of 98% of its fresh water by Israel, Syria, and Jordan, and the discharge of untreated sewage, agricultural runoff, saline water, and fish pond effluent in its place. So, like I said, the Jordan River is going to be a disappointment. By the time the river gets to where we are visiting, most of the water has been siphoned off upstream to be stored in dams, to be used for agriculture, hydroelectric, and to support cities, etc. And this is, after all, largely dry area. It has a lot of agriculture, so the water is very precious. At its best today, the Jordan River is only about 10 meters, around 40 to 50 feet wide. It lies low in a riverbed lined by tamarinds and reeds. And Jordan and Israel each claim that the true baptismal site of Jesus is on their territory, because both of them want to build hotels and have tourist facilities. The Israeli site, where at least some people think Jesus may have been baptized, is actually in a closed military area near the West Bank city of Jericho, and it is closed to tourists. What a clever kibbutz has done is create a baptismal site called Yardenet, which is on the, quote, Little Jordan River. To me, it's a little like me baking bread, saying it's kosher, even though it's not. But since a lot of Jewish folks buy my so-called kosher bread and like it, and it's very profitable, so what, you know. So we fudge a little on it being about kosher, but everybody likes it, you know. Now, the folks at Yardenet do admit that the site that some people think Jesus may have been baptized is 120 kilometers away. But people are willing to spend their money at Yardenet, so be it. The first thing you will see when you get there, and what really dominates the experience, is this gigantic supermarket of souvenirs. And believe me, everything is on sale here. You've got sacred holy perfume, even the bread of life. You can get holy water right out of the river, which may or may not be the Jordan River. And the real hot seller here, folks, is the baptismal robes that they sell for $25 each. If you want to go in and self-baptize yourself at this place, where some people, well, nobody really thinks Jesus was, but anyhow, if you want to go in and jump in the river and self-baptize yourself, you need to buy one of these robes for $25. Now, they're cheap cotton robes. What nobody tells you is that when the robes get wet, they are completely and totally transparent. People all caught up in the moment without a clue what. So if you're tempted to do this, be sure to wear your underwear when you go in, please. So a lot of folks self-baptize themselves here. I don't know of any Christian community in the world that recognizes self-baptism. So it's more or less a superstitious kind of thing. You pay your money, you take your choice. I know that the Princess literature refers to this as the spot where John the Baptist baptized Jesus in the Jordan River. You didn't hear this from me, but you need to understand that this copy was written by folks in California, where, as you know, medical marijuana is legal. So in the home office, they smoke funny cigarettes, but what can I say, okay? If you do decide to be baptized here, you should know that there are these guys swimming all around the area. The health department says that it is clean. You can look, you can make your own determination before you hop in. So between the catfish on the left-hand side here and you see the water rats on the right-hand side, and all of this is in the area, well, you decide what you want to do. But anyhow, that's your net. The circle up here is the dam where they let the water in for this area from the Sea of Galilee. Now, if I can give you a word of personal advice, where you are baptized doesn't mean anything. You're not going to get the front row seat in heaven because you come early. Actually, nobody ever wants to go to heaven early for some reason. I don't know why that is. But you're not going to get a front row seat just because of where you were baptized. Fortunately for me, I went to a baptism just before I left home, which really was a great baptism. The 27-year-old Nobe Bugli Indian guy who works for me on my coffee farm was baptized in this cathedral, the river right down the mountain from our house. That really was a cool baptism. That's really what baptism is all about. It's not where you're baptized, it's what it means to you and what it does in your life and the effect that it has on your life. So the traditional site of the Sermon on the Mount is actually pretty, again, how old the tradition is has a lot to do with how authentic the place is. And the tradition here is actually quite old. And when you go to any of these places, there have been churches built upon churches, built upon churches, built upon churches. So although the church there is relatively new, there was originally a thing there that goes all the way back to the 1st century. So that indicates that it's probably a pretty authentic site. But this is where Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount and where he gave the Beatitudes or blessings. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are you when men persecute you because of your righteousness, for to you belongs the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Great, rejoice, be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, if you remember the story of the Sermon on the Mount, what happened? All these people came out. They heard Jesus talk. Then what? They were hungry, and there was no McDonald's. So just down the hill from here, you will stop at the site of the feeding of the 5,000, or the miracle of multiplication, where Jesus brought off what not even the galley staff of Pacific princes can achieve. So, as some of you remember, this was on the Sea of Galilee on the shore. In addition to being the traditional location of the miracle of the loaves and fishes, it is also the traditional site of the 4th resurrection appearance of Jesus. Until 1948 and the creation of Israel, it was just an Arab village, but there has been a chapel here since the 4th century BC. Now there are actually 2 churches here. The original Church of the Multiplication was destroyed in 614 by the invading Persians. In 1932, German archaeologists excavated the site, and in 1981 it was restored by the German Benedictine monks who operate the church that you'll see today. So that church is a relatively new, very nice church. The other church that you only just get a glimpse from the bus is, and sometimes they'll point it out, sometimes they won't, is the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter that sits on the rocks of the shore of Galilee. This is where Jesus appeared for the fourth time after his resurrection and told Peter to take care of my flock. Zipporah is the birthplace of the Virgin Mary. Highlights of the site include the remains of exquisite mosaic floors, a Roman amphitheater and baths, an ancient synagogue, and a tower dating from the Crusades. There's an interesting mosaic here on one of the ancient floors, which is called the Mona Lisa of Galilee. And I think if you look at that, you can see a distinct resemblance to the Mona Lisa. Now, one of the highlights for Jews and Christians alike is the old city of Bethlehem. For Jews and Christians alike, this is the city of David, where King David was from, where he was crowned king. It has a population today of around 30,000. It's 20% Christian. Today it is the capital of the Bethlehem Governorate of the Palestinian National Authority. The economy is based on tourism, handicrafts, textiles, paints, plastic, food products, and wine, and also focused on becoming a separate Palestinian state. We were actually up here on the night when the guy who's the president, the voice box of the Palestinian Authority, went to the UN and gave his speech asking for them to be admitted as a state. And it was interesting. There were flags all over and people celebrating, and it was really a nice evening. And yes, for those of you who are asking, this is the same David who went out to slay the giant Goliath, immortalized by Michelangelo, thought probably to be the best artistic representation of the male form ever created. Now, you do know that there is quite a controversy about whether or not Michelangelo's version of David is anatomically correct. And no, it's not that. It's just that some of us think that David is a little bit undernourished, and that maybe this is a more accurate depiction of the ideal male form. So, again, pay your money, take your choice. Now, when you visit Bethlehem, you're leaving Israel, you're entering the West Bank or the Palestine National Authority, so there will be security checks as you pass through the wall over the border, because the guides in the West Bank must be Palestinian. Although your original guide will probably ride on the bus with you, the commentary within the West Bank will be provided by another guide. They're equally professional, equally as good. And as you might expect, while you're in these areas, there may be occasional security spot checks of the buses where police or military carrying guns may come aboard the bus. Now, I know when you go to Israel and some of these places, Egypt, everybody gets all gaga because they're carrying machine guns. Ooh, they have guns. There are all these guys with guns all over. Which is interesting because have you ever looked at cops in the U.S. or Canada? They all have at least one gun that you can see and probably three more strapped elsewhere in their bodies. And they have a shotgun in the back of the car. So, I mean, guns are nothing new. That's what officers of the law and police and soldiers carry. It's just that this is a different kind of gun, and so it's a little bit surprising at first. But when these guys, you'll even see the Israeli soldiers out training. They go to the different touristic sites just as a familiarization tour, but you'll see these guys in civvies carrying their gun along, because in training, they're trained that the gun is more important than their wife, and you don't go any place without your gun. And they're trying to drill that in them. So don't let that throw you. If they do come on board the bus, just sit tight, be patient. Please don't take pictures of anything military, and don't joke around. This is serious business. The Palestinian National Authority, or West Bank, grew out of the PLO. It was established in 1994. It is a semi-presidential parliamentary democracy that has historically been in conflict with Israel since the creation of the Israeli state. It is, however, within the boundaries of Israel, although it's a separate entity within Israel. So part of the Palestinian National Authority is the West Bank, and the other part is the Gaza Strip, which borders with Egypt and which traditionally has been a hotbed of conflict, and you've seen some of that going on in the news, even maybe while we've been on this cruise. The Palestinian National Authority consists of 2.5 million people with a median age of 21. 73% are Muslim, 17% are Jewish, 7% are Christian. It's slightly larger if you take all the territories combined, slightly larger than the U.S. state of Delaware, has 16% unemployment. It does not have its own currency, but uses Egyptian, Jordanian, and Israeli currencies. Now, if you read the New Testament account of the birth of Jesus, the wise man, the star, King Herod, beneath the glory of Christmas, all kinds of folks were playing pretty much the same power political games back then as today. So nothing is really new. But if you look beyond the politics and the squabbles of who gets what, and who said what, and who controls what, and what the current tension and conflict is, and you consider the events that happened here way back when, in a world, although much smaller, had its own political intrigue and violence. If you look back at the event, I think it can be a very meaningful experience. Here you have a poor teenage mother called to be the mother of the Son of God, and the birth of Jesus, the Christ, happened right here in Bethlehem in what was really nothing more than a cave. Here is where the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten Son of God. Now, traditionally, on Christmas Eve, Manger Square in Bethlehem comes alive with security forces, tourists from all over the world who want to be here to celebrate the night of what probably was not the night of Jesus' birth. We know that in December on the hills outside of Bethlehem, it can be very cold, very windy. It's unlikely that shepherds would be out in the fields keeping watch over their flocks by night in the midst of winter. Probably they were hunkered down in a cave in town trying to keep warm. But because the Romans celebrated their pagan festival of Saturnalia on December 25th, the early church, burdened by persecution, decided that when the Romans were all dead drunk and whooping and hollering, it would be a good time to hold their celebration of the Savior's birth, come under the radar. The Romans would never know what was happening, and so it came about that the Western Christian Church celebrates the birth of Christ on December 25th. So already in 150 A.D., this cave in Bethlehem was being attested to as being the site of the birth of Jesus Christ. So 150 A.D. is very old, and that gives a lot of authenticity to this. It was attested to by none other than the early Christian apologists, an apologist not being someone who made an apology, said, I'm sorry, but someone who explained, gave a rational explanation for Christianity. The apologist Justin Martyr, who lived 100 to 165 A.D. So this is a very important, very holy site, and probably an authentic site. This is also a holy site for Muslims who see Jesus as one of the prophets, who have a great deal of respect for Mary, the mother of Christ. And it is continually being referred to as the birthplace of Christ by many disparate ancient writers. So that gives it a lot of authenticity. The first basilica on this site was begun by St. Helena, the mother of the Emperor Constantine, in 327 A.D. That structure was burnt down in the Samaritan Revolt of 529. The current basilica was rebuilt in its present form in 565 by the Emperor Justinian I. The entrance here is very low. There's different ideas about why it is so low. Perhaps it was just designed to keep horses and livestock from wandering into the old church, or maybe it was done purposely to force everybody to bow down when entering. There are actually two churches side by side here, the older Greek Orthodox Church and a newer Roman Catholic Church. The story is that when the Persians invaded, their commander was so moved by the depiction inside the original church of the three wise men dressed in Persian clothing that he decided to spare the building. The Crusaders came along, they made additions to the building. Through the years, the compound has expanded until today it covers 12,000 square meters, making it possible for Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Apostolic traditions all to share administration of the church and have separate monastic communities in the facility. So this is the very spot where, according to Christian tradition, the Word became flesh to dwell among us. Probably the tour is not going to go down into the actual grotto. Usually the tour guide will tell you that the wait is too long. Religious tourism in Israel is as efficient and mass-produced as McDonald's hamburgers. And it doesn't matter who you go with, but they will usually take you down inside another adjacent cave, which is very similar to the one where Jesus was born. And who knows, it may have been that cave, it may have been another cave. Nobody knows exactly which cave it was for sure, but you'll get the feeling of what this was like. It was not at all like the Radio City Music Hall Christmas pageant where you see Jesus and all these great, no. It was a very simple cave, a poor Jewish girl giving birth to a baby. So then after Bethlehem, it's back to the Israeli wall into Israel, passing through the Israeli version of the Berlin Wall, something like the U.S. version of the Mexican border. One of the holiest sites for Jews is called Rachel's tomb. It's an ancient structure believed to be the burial place of the biblical matriarch Rachel. This structure was identified as such as early as the 4th century A.D. In 1947, the UN planned that the site should lie within an international zone. However, following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the tomb was incorporated into the West Bank. It was 19 years before Israel captured the tomb during the 1967 Six Days War. The 1995 Oslo Accords also stipulated that Israel would retain control of the tomb, and by late 1996, Israel enclosed the tomb within a fortified wall and stuff. So through the years, Rachel's tomb has morphed into this, a little bit like visiting a maximum security prison with all of the security, but that's just the world we live in. And this is a convoluted map of Israel's annexation of corridors of access, which will let them into Rachel's tomb and some other things. But I show you this because it gives you an idea of the crazy complications that rule this holy land today. Nazareth is, of course, another biblical site of great historical and religious significance. It was here that an angel appeared to a young Jewish girl, telling her how miraculously she would conceive and bear a son that she should name Jesus, for he would save his people from their sins. The church was established here at the site where, according to tradition, this poor Jewish teenager received this message. But, you know, the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox Christians both have different ideas where this was to have taken place. They're both certain that they know exactly where it was, even though nobody was present at the time, but don't let that get in the way. So this happens to be the Catholic Church. There's another one that is where the Greek Orthodox say that it happened. If you believe in the virgin birth, which is a Christian I do, you need to focus on the event and not the exact place where it may have taken place. This current church was actually constructed in 1969. Remember, again, they build on top, on top, on top. It's a beautiful church. Below it is a Byzantine era, then a Crusader era church, and blah, blah, blah. But if you go inside, down below, it's really a gorgeous structure today. But down below, in the center of the altar, you will see the actual cave, and you can walk down here, which is the cave where they believe, at least the Catholics believe, that Mary was visited by the angel and told that she would bear the Savior. I thought this was interesting. This is a sign on a little mosque right outside the Church of the Annunciation, quoting from the Quran, and whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him, and in the hereafter he will be one of the losers. Now, lest that offend Christians, remember that Jesus, whom Islam recognizes as a prophet, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. Interestingly, this picture I took maybe 3 times ago. Last cruise when I went up there, and I couldn't find the picture, I'd show it to you. Last 2 cruises when I went up there, someone blacked this out. And what else did they black this out? Somebody obviously didn't like the tenor of this sign, and they went out and spray painted out certain key elements. So. But it was here that Jesus was taken to the temple, like all Jewish boys, to be circumcised 8 days after his birth, which was a popular subject for artists. Now, the size of that knife would have gotten me, but anyhow. The event is celebrated as the Feast of the Circumcision in Eastern Orthodox churches on January 1st, and by many Anglicans as well. Roman Catholics celebrate it as the Feast of the Holy Name of Jesus. And there was a period when relics of the saints and religious people, bones, skulls, fingers, etc., were revealed as holy by simple, uneducated, illiterate people. So not surprisingly, through the years, a number of relics claiming to be the holy foreskin have surfaced through the centuries. Who knows? But it was here that Jesus grew up, being very God of very God, yet 100% a man, going through adolescence, which could have been easy, working in his father's carpentry shop. Now, you talk about the ideal carpenter's apprentice. A guy who never made an error in measuring, never spoiled a piece of wood. Everything fit perfectly. God, that would be great. So it couldn't have been easy for Jesus, for Joseph, or Mary. Wisely, the Bible is pretty silent about Jesus' youth. The apocryphal books do have some wonderful stories about Jesus, for example, impressing his playmates by making some clay pigeons and then clapping his hands and getting the pigeons to fly away. I mean, that would impress the guys on the block, I tell you. We do know that against his mother's wishes, he, probably younger than shown in this picture, went off to discuss theology with the elders in the temple, without first checking with mom. 2 mistakes here. Didn't check with mom. And number 2, he probably was too young to go into the temple on his own. But there he was. So how do you train and discipline the Son of God? You ground him? Take away the keys to the camel? I don't know. But the Bible wisely doesn't include all this. It just cryptically says, and Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. So obviously she did a good job. Capernaum was a fishing village located in the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was a little town with a population of about 1,500. It's often described as the center of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. You'll go to the ancient ruins of the ancient town of Capernaum. You'll see the ruins of what was Peter's mother-in-law's house. You'll see there's a church actually built over it today. There are actually 2 synagogues here. This one is among the oldest synagogues in the world, dates back to the 4th century. But below this is another synagogue that dates back to the time of that Jesus would have been there. Remember, Jesus was a rabbi and taught in the synagogue. And you can see the subsurface of that when you go to visit there. This I showed you this morning. You know, when I talk about the dress requirements, people always want to know, was this too short? Is that too short? It says no shorts. You interpret what that means. But on this cruise, when we're going to religious sites, you need to dress conservatively. Just keep that in mind. The Sea of Galilee boat, sometimes called the Jesus boat, is an ancient fishing boat from the 1st century A.D., the time of Christ, discovered in 1986 on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. There was a drought. And as the sea retreated, they discovered the remains of this boat. It's 27 feet, 8.27 meters long, 7.5 feet wide, 2.3 meters wide, with a maximum preserved height of 4.3 feet or 1.3 meters. Radiocarbon dating has dated the boat around 40 BC to 50 AD, which would be the period when Jesus lived. Pottery and nails found in the boat, as well as construction design, show that the boat was actually used for almost a century. When it was no longer usable, it deteriorated, sank to the bottom of the lake. There it was covered by mud, which actually is what prevented the bacterial decomposition of the boat, and so you have it today. Haifa was an important area during the Crusades when Europeans came to reclaim the Holy Land. This is Akko, or Accra. We call it Accra, they call it Akko. It's in the northern extremity of Haifa Bay. It's one of the oldest continually inhabited sites in Israel. Accra is also the holiest city of the Baha'i faith, has a population of around 46,000 today. It's a mixed city, 72% Jewish and about 28% Arab. It's mentioned already by the Egyptians in the 16th century BC. It's mentioned in the Old Testament book of Judges as one of the places where the Israelites were unable to drive out the Canaanites. It was the territory eventually of the tribe of Asher. According to the historian Josephus, one of the places ruled by Solomon's provincial governors. It was conquered and occupied by the Crusaders. Today it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Exploring this city allows you to journey back in time. What's interesting is, like all of these studies, this was built layer upon layer upon layer, and what they're doing is going under the ruins of the city down to the sub-layers. So this is actually the room that was the refractory or dining room when Richard the Lionhearted was here in Accra. And at one time it was all filled up with dirt and rock, and they have excavated, gone down. They're continuing to do this. So it's a fascinating, fascinating place. So we're sailing into Haifa, or Haifa, the third largest city in Israel with a population of about 265,000, metropolitan area of about 1 million. It's been a port city since the 14th century BC, has been ruled by Byzantines, Crusaders, Arabs, Ottomans, Germans, and British. It is a very nice city. I mean, there's very little police presence. It's a mixed population, Arab, Christian, Jews. They all get along together. They're all very proud of the fact that they do. Israelis like to say, Haifa works, Jerusalem prays, Tel Aviv plays, to indicate the different characters of the city. It is home to the Baha'i World Center. Baha'i is a monotheistic religion founded in Persia in the 19th century, emphasizing the spiritual unity of all humankind. There are beautiful gardens, supposed to be reminiscent of the gardens of Babylon. Our free Princess shuttle bus will take you from the ship to the top of these gardens, and there's at the top of Mount Carmel, there's a fantastic view up there. Now, formalities take time in Israel. You'll get a sheet the night before explaining everything, what you do, how it works. You will end up with a green landing card that you must carry with you. They don't stamp your passport because there's some countries in the world that won't let you in if you have an Israeli stamp in your passport. So they stamp the landing card, and you have to take that along with your passport. Once the ship is cleared, if you're on tour, the tour buses will be right there. If you're independent, it's a fair walk to the port gates and the train station. You will see trains from the ship. They go almost everywhere within Israel, but you will need shekels or a credit card. English is widely spoken, but Hebrew is the language. English is not universal. A lot of taxi drivers don't speak English. They are not licensed as guides. The modern city of Haifa was only established in 1957 on what was then desert sand by the seashore. It's developed quickly into a modern port. There isn't a whole lot to see there. If you're thinking you want to go up to the Holy Land, you're not taking a tour, you want to get up to Jerusalem or something, you really ought to get online and book something. It's not where you go out and there are a bunch of guys standing there with little placards saying, here's a day tour for this or that. There will be a complimentary shuttle by Princess in Haifa that will go from the port. Here's where we are. It goes over to the German colony, and then it goes up to the top of Mount Carmel. It runs throughout the day, probably about every hour. And what's nice is this, it's called the German colony, and I know that always throws people, but during the mid-19th century, a group of German Christians came on a modern mission to the Holy Land. They settled in this part of Haifa, establishing this German colony. During the lead up to World War II, many of those folks were sympathetic to Nazi propaganda. They left, went to Germany. The colony died out. It became a big slum. And then a number of years ago, they got some UNESCO help, and it was restored. Today, it's a very lively center for restaurants and cafes. If you're going to be in Haifa for the evening, it's a wonderful place just to go and spend the evening. There's one little boutique hotel in the German colony near where the shuttle bus will drop you off. If you're on your own, you will need some shekels. If you want to use public transportation, buy a Coke, whatever. The only place I know of really close there is kitty corner across from this hotel. There is an ATM there where you can get some money. And if you bring that map down, now that they're all gone, I can show you where that is. I talked this morning about Abraham and his importance to all faiths, really all of the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all spring from Abraham, and he's highly regarded as a prophet in all of these. And this is very important in understanding when we get to Jerusalem. You have the holiest of all holy cities, often just referred to as the holy city, but it is a city divided by a whole lot of different interests, all competing for control. You've got Arab, you've got Jewish, you've got Palestine, you've got Israel. And then you throw into the mix that you have three different faiths, for all of whom this is a very important religious site. And as if that isn't bad enough, all of these different faiths have different groups within the faith, all competing for territory and control and whatever. So I mentioned this guy, Hank Bauma. This is what he writes about Jerusalem. So this is it. City of my dreams, city of peace. Forget it. City of discord, city of injustice, city of violence. At any moment, anywhere here, a bomb may explode. City of glamour, city of kitsch, city of commercialization. People try to make money out of anything, even out of the holiest. But I will not give up my dream. I dream my dream furiously. Jerusalem, I shall believe in it. So we're going to the holy city of Jerusalem, sacred to three major faiths, mentioned 656 times in the Old Testament, 140 times in the New Testament, a center of civilization for over 4,000 years, King Solomon's capital, a place where Noah's son, Abraham, the prophets, and Jesus all walked on these ancient streets, and today it is the capital of Israel. And this remarkable city has been divided through the years. In all of this, it has survived. And what's going on today is just a minor blip on the history of this city. The conflict and struggle that's characterized the holy city throughout its history continues, and at the heart of Jerusalem is one of the most important monuments, the center of faith for all three religions, the Dome of the Rock. It was here that Abraham was called to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac, and then at the last moment Yahweh intervened and provided a symbolic lamb for the sacrifice, a lamb symbolic to Christians as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. For Jews, the Dome of the Rock is the most holy site, the Mecca, if you will, of Jerusalem. It is here that the foundation stone is located, believed by some to have once been the actual location of the Holy of Holies in the temple, which was where God met his people, the junction of heaven and earth, and the place toward which Jews traditionally face while praying. For Muslims, this is the very spot from which Muhammad ascended to heaven, accompanied by the angel Gabriel to talk with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, before returning to earth to call the world to Islam. And for Christians who theologically and biblically see themselves as the new Israel, and hence God's chosen people, all of these Jewish connections are significant. The building here was originally built around 70 AD as a church by Constantine's mother, was originally called the Church of St. Cyrus and St. John, later the Church of Holy Wisdom. And it's here that you have the Western Wall, or Wailing Wall, which is the most sacred Jewish site in Jerusalem. It is all that remains of a wall that supported a raised area on which the Second Temple stood. Now, to understand the significance of this, you have to understand a little of the biblical history. When Moses led the children of Israel, and Israel was the name given by God to Jacob after he had successfully wrestled with an angel of God. When Moses led the Israelites out of captivity in Egypt toward the promised land, they were instructed to build what was called a tabernacle where God would meet his people. The directions for the tabernacle were quite specific, and it had to be built almost, without being irreverent, but almost like a circus tent, so it could be easily collapsed, transported, and then reassembled. God's presence in the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle was represented during the day by a pillar of cloud and at night by a pillar of fire. Once the people reached the promised land, the portable tabernacle was replaced by the first temple built in 957 BC by King Solomon on what has become known as the Temple Mount in the Old City of Jerusalem. The temple not only represented the glory of God, but also the glory of Solomon and the power of his people. And so it was an object of repeated attack by the Pharaoh of Egypt, by the king of Syria. Each time it was sacked, but then rebuilt. Finally, it was totally destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC, and the Jewish nation was exiled to Babylon. That begins what's known as the Babylonian captivity. And you all know the song about by the rivers of Babylon and all that. So this is a model of the second temple that was constructed at the site of that original tabernacle, which stood from 516 until 70 AD. In 19 BC, the temple was renovated by Herod the Great, and so it got the name of Herod's Temple. The second temple was destroyed in 70 AD when the Romans under Titus sacked Jerusalem, defiled the temple, and carried the spoils of war back to Rome, including the Jewish captives to be used as slaves and the golden candlestick or menorah from the now destroyed temple in Jerusalem. If you go to Rome and you've been next to the Colosseum to the Arch of Titus, inside the Arch of Titus, this is carved on the wall. And it shows the soldiers coming triumphantly back to Rome after sacking Jerusalem. They've got Jewish captives carrying the spoils of war, and there prominently displayed is the golden menorah from the temple. So if you go on tour, you'll enter the old city through the Dung Gate, the ancient sewer and sanitation department. Proceed to the western wall, which is divided into two sections, the northern section for men, smaller southern section for women. Your guide will set a meeting time, and you will be on your own. You may wish to pray at the wall. There will be yarmulkes available for men. You'll see the cracks in the wall crammed with bits of paper containing prayers, and you might want to think beforehand what you want to write down on your paper and be prepared, because there isn't a whole lot of time there. But regardless of your religious faith or lack thereof, I can tell you that this will be a meaningful and sacred moment. And I have to tell you, as a non-Jew, I didn't expect this to be the very moving and spiritual experience that it was for me personally. Standing there, head against the wall, praying is a very spiritually empowering experience. And so I would encourage you to do more than just watch, especially if you've been caught up in the commercialism and the rushing around of the tour. It is really a very moving experience. Again, Hank Bauma, endlessly people mourn, declare their need here, no temple, no roof over their heads. They pray and they pray up against these walls. They believe, they hope, they dream. The wall sweats of it, the air is heavy. And all the while we are taking pictures. But that's just the way it is. Yad Vashem is a striking architectural monument and museum and research center dedicated to the victims of the Holocaust, with the prayer and hope that we will never forget, and that never forgetting, we will never again allow something like this to happen again to anyone, anywhere. It is a solemn reminder that once you treat anyone else as less than human, or you stereotype and dehumanize a group of people because of their race, their religion, their politics, their sexual preference, once you demonize and depersonalize a group of people, people who are in some way different than you, you step on a slippery slope that ultimately ends up like this. And this is a sober, yet in many ways an inspiring memorial to the triumph of faith and human spirit that perseveres in spite of all the forces of evil. And it really is at the core of understanding the Jewish experience and the emotional and spiritual foundation of the modern state of Israel. This is the abbey, the site of the tomb of King David. I don't want to get off on this. Most people accept that this is not the tomb of King David. It's called the tomb of King David, that one of the Jewish kings is buried here, but we're 99.9% sure it's not King David because of what the Old Testament says about where he's buried. It's also, this area is the traditional site of the Last Supper. The New Testament tells us about Jesus' final days before his crucifixion, about the Passover, or what has become known as the Last Supper that he celebrated with his disciples. This is the traditional painting of Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper in the upper room in Jerusalem. Same event, different artists, different view, and different interpretation. This one I personally like, although it's not perhaps politically correct, but I think it's a more accurate representation of a group of disciples who didn't have a clue what was going on and were busy squabbling amongst themselves while the young disciple John, whom the Bible calls the disciple Jesus loved, and I'm not making any implications here, folks, but young John obviously has had way too much to drink, way too much Passover wine. And I love the sleeping dog and the cat over here getting ready to sneak in any table droppings that the dog may have mixed. Makes me feel right at home, actually. Here's another view, another artist, same event. John still hungover, disciples still not getting the whole thing. Judas making a hasty exit to be embraced over here on the extreme right by death and the devil, and the disciples still clueless. Now, we don't know for sure where this event traditionally occurred, but Aleph Fiddler on the Roof, tradition says that it occurred in a room similar to one where they'll take you. Okay, and it was in this general area of town. How's that for specific? Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed in agony while his disciples, still clueless, slept off their Passover celebration. The place where Jesus prayed, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the soundtrack is of snoring disciples. So you have your pick of traditional Gethsemanes. There's 4 different ones to choose from. The tour operators generally pick this site where the Church of All Nations overlooks Jerusalem. The peaceful garden features a grove of ancient olive trees where Judas supposedly betrayed Christ. The Way of Sorrows, or Via Dolorosa, is the narrow cobbled road that Jesus walked carrying his cross from the place of Pontius Pilate's sentencing to Golgotha, where he was crucified. It's an important site of pilgrimage. The guide will gather everyone together, then you'll continue up this. It can be very crowded at times. If you're going on tour, you need to stay with the guide or you're going to become an Israeli. It's just that simple, guys. If you want to leave and shop, and he said don't shop, then be sure you speak Hebrew because we ain't waiting for you. But so stay with your tour. There's a lot of walking on this. Wear good walking shoes. We don't know exactly. There's different theories as to where Christ was crucified. This one, some people see a skull here, but we know that Jesus was dead. That's very important in Christian theology, that he was dead. He wasn't just in a coma or something. And he was taken from the cross and placed in a borrowed tomb. Where was this tomb? Again, nobody knows for sure. This is what's called the Garden Tomb. There are different theories, different ideas. This one really, nobody came up with this idea until the 19th century. So that being so late doesn't give it a lot of credibility. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, also called the Church of the Resurrection by Eastern Christians, is within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. It's probably the most likely site of Golgotha, or the Hill of Calvary, since this has been the tradition since around 300 AD. It's also said to be the place where Jesus was buried and from which he arose again from the dead. And that is pretty much agreed by most folks. Today it serves as the headquarters of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, while control of it is shared between several Christian churches and secular entities in a complicated arrangement, essentially unchanged for centuries. So thank you, Jesus. Finally, all these folks have agreed on something. Well, at least these 3 groups. Interestingly, that agreement is tenuous enough that the keys to this church are not held by any one of those groups, but by a prominent Muslim family. to keep everybody from fighting together. Okay, and really, this is my personal thought. What difference does it make if we're all Christians? Who cares who has the keys to what? But apparently here it's a big deal, and it's going to be interesting when we all get up to heaven and what happens. But this is the church, is the place of the final stations of the cross, covering the place where most traditions accept to be the hill of Calvary. Again, don't expect to go down into what some people think is the sepulcher, because it's a 2-hour wait. Now, shifting quickly from theology, the Dead Sea is really for folks who've already been to Jerusalem. They want to experience the shores of one of the lowest places on earth. When you're at the Dead Sea, you're about 1,280 feet below sea level. Compared to regular seawater, the Dead Sea holds 20 times the amount of bromine, 10 times as much iodine. You don't want to swallow it, but it can be an enjoyable sensation just sitting, floating in the water. Some studies have indicated that the Dead Sea is beneficial for people suffering from psoriasis, and the mud said to have curative powers for people suffering from osteoarthritis. It's a funny sensation there. You know, usually if you're floating, how do you get up? You just shift your weight a little bit, and the weight of your hips carry you down and upright. Guess what? It doesn't work. It's the funniest thing to try and get up, because nothing is shifting. It's really strange. And that's not sand, folks. That's salt. And these folks are a few of our illustrious crew members, folks with important jobs on Pacific Princess, usually quite normal, but give them some Dead Sea mud to play with. And I'm sometimes pretty skeptical about these spa. Don't tell the spa girls this is spa treatments. But after being in the Dead Sea, it is amazing how soft and clean your skin feels. It really is strange. On the drive through the Negev and along the Dead Sea, you actually drive by Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And it was here on the top of the cliffs at Masada that King Herod built a palace as a place of refuge in the event of a revolt. During the First Jewish War against the Roman Empire, a group of Jewish extremists called Zealots overcame the Roman garrison on Masada. In 72, the Roman legion laid siege to this. They actually built a ramp from the bottom here up to the top. When they got up there, everyone was dead. They had committed suicide rather than yield to the Romans' conquest. So it's a very interesting place to visit, and if the day is clear, you get a fantastic view of the Dead Sea. So just some holy tips as we do this. Look beyond the immediate. Determine beforehand what it is that you are going to experience, and then don't let all the commercialism and the kitsch get in your way. Accept that you can't see and do everything in this one trip. Take as little as possible: water, toilet paper, camera. Unfortunately, even in the Holy Land, sinners and pickpockets abound, so watch your stuff. The pace is swift. There's little time for shopping except in designated spots. And if you see a place to go, go, because you may not see another place. Knees and shoulders must be covered for both men and women. It's preferable for women to wear skirts. Do not take pictures of police, soldiers, or military compounds or vehicles of any kind. If you are signing up for a ship's tour, please respect the activity levels. There's a lot of walking, lots of steps in the Old City. Every tour is not for everybody. So respect your body, know your limitations, and respect that there are others on the tour who want to keep pace. Just to close with this is another Hank Baumer poem, but I think it's great. 10,000 years of history, and we covered them all in 3 hours, and we even took a half-hour break for lunch. So, folks, have a great formal evening on board Pacific Princess. Coming up will be a talk on Egypt, which you really need to come to hear, to know what to expect when we go to Egypt. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you.